It's been over a decade at this point that Gen 6 introduced the seizure of Steel's resistance to Dark and Ghost, which was a defining feature of the previous three generations. And goes to show how old I am, because I still consider that a new change, even at this point. Even far after I've gotten used to it, I'm still like, oh, remember when Steel resisted those types? Jeez Louise, these kids these days, they don't even know, you know. And to say nothing of people wondering why Clefable is used in Gen 4, even though it's not a fairy type. But that's a separate thing. Anyway, so I understand why Steel no longer resisted Dark and Ghost, or the idea of taking resists away from Steel in general, not necessarily specifically those. Because you can't make Steel resist the new fairy types and also continue having it resist everything else to the extent it did. I'm just wondering if it needed to lose its resists to both Dark and Ghost. And this isn't even about like a symmetry thing, like, oh, it now has one less resist than it did previously. Because I also know that by virtue of increased steel and poison attacking viability, types which were on the specific side in terms of super effective coverage, almost to be non-existent in the previous generations, steel resisting those, or being immune in poison's case, that becomes much more valuable in a fairy type metagame. So in effect, its defensive profile is just as important, or maybe even better if you really want to break it down. I'm really just wondering if both Dark and Ghost needed to be nerfed, because I don't think it's a coincidence that Dark and Ghost types have been some of the most controversial aspects of the past 4 generations. And, I mean, I would really... Let me rephrase this before I even say it, yeah. I know Game Freak is not really forward-thinking in this regard, and sometimes they go back or they make updates that kind of go against what the spirit of a previous idea was. Like, for example, the one I always go to is in Gen 7, when they nerfed burn damage to 6.25% per turn. As it was in Gen 1, you know, fine idea for the most part, but it comes with the unintended consequence of Conkeldurr being able to burn itself with Flame Orb, and now only taking 6.25 every turn. You know, previously a Status Orb, Conkeldurr, or Heracross, or whatever, would often go with Toxic Orb. You know, you saw that with Swellow and DPPUU, for example, because it's not just about, oh, well, burn is consistently only 12.5. It's, well, Toxic takes several turns before it starts really racking up on you. So if you're only going to be on the field for a few turns, you want that initial lower damage. And then when you have a Flame Orb that always just gives you that 6.25, these Pokemon, these massive threats, these Ursarings of the world, they are much scarier to deal with, because so much of what held them back before was the fact that they would get worn down, whether with the immediacy of burn or eventuality of Toxic. And now you have a burn that doesn't wear them down at all. So that's an example of the kind of concept I'm talking about, where they didn't really think this through. And what I mean how I mean it in relation to this video specifically is in Gen 8, of course, they removed Pursuit for whatever genius reason. And now we have a game where Ghost is both not resisted by Steel and not resisted by much else. It'd be different if Ghost, you know, was loaded with other resists, but it's really not. And there's no Pursuit to punish it either. So, yeah, that's kind of the core of what I'm getting at. I mean, you look at some of the controversial Pokemon of the last couple gens. You know, let's just take the most recent ones. In Gen 9, we've got guys like King Gambit and Chien Pao. And in Gen 8, we've got Dragapult and Weavile and well, okay, I'm not going to say that. Urshifu, the dark one, not the water one, wasn't going to be absolutely insane anyway, even if you could resist its Wicked Blow with Steel, because, you know, on account of the fact that it's close combat. But it just made it even more impossible to deal with. But, you know, let's put that one aside. You know, and even before that, let's go back to Gen 6. where Bisharp and Weavile are immense pains. You've got Specs Hydreigon ripping Dark Pulses through the tier. Not to say that that's broken or on par with it, but Specs Hydreigon was following in the tradition of Hoopa Unbound, whose Specs Dark Pulse set was destroying the tier because, previously, oh, well, Stab Dark, Heatran, Ferrothorn, a million other things, yeah, you'll be fine. And now it's way more limited. I mean, yes, it gained... Dark is more palatable, though, still, because of how it also gained a new resist in Fairy. So, also, I happen to think that Hoopa Unbound is not even broken in Oris. I made a video about it. But, again, another subject. Yeah, so it's with this in mind that I think Ghost was the one that should have kept its resist. Because, with Dark, at least you gained a new resist to it in Fairy. So it has the same number of resists as before. With Ghost, you just pretty much gave it, you didn't replace it with anything. At least before there was still the Pursuit of it all factoring in. But now, with Pursuit running around, I mean, I know Spectrier would have been an insane Pokemon either way because it's so fast and so strong, but its move pool is so awful. And it gets even worse if its Stab, Shadow Ball, or Hex, or whatever you're using, can't hit steals. I mean, yes, plus Will-O-Wisp would still be very annoying, but the fact is you would no longer be able to plow through everything with Spec Shadow Ball the way you normally could, and only be able to slow it down with Dark types, which, yeah, great, but, I mean, look at the story of Dragapult in Gen 8 OU, another controversial presence. As demonstrated in recent Gen 8 OU tiering arguments. So you've got that demonstrating that if you can have the Dark type, it's not necessarily going to save you in the long term because these ghosts get on the field and just hit you over and over and over and over again. Look at how terrifying Blacephalon is in Gen 8 OU as opposed to Gen 7, where it still definitely has value in Gen 7. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's... when you can just Shadow Ball into everything, it's a lot scarier without fear of being destroyed. Sorry, I'm trying to reorganize everything. With Ghost, it's pretty much dark or normal. And I'm not saying that everything that isn't dark or normal is automatically getting exploded by Shadow Balls. Dragapult isn't that strong. At first, anyway. It's not that it's immediately blowing everything in its path apart. It's more that it's going to do it over and over and over. And those modest Spec Shadow Balls really hurt. So, you might be able to stave it off, once or twice. But it's going to keep coming at you. And, yeah. So, I think with Dark, it's a lot more balanced. Because you have this new tool. And it's not like Fairy types are terrible either. Fairy types are some of the best Pokemon in the game. So... with Ghost, there needs to be some repercussion. I mean, maybe it's still even fair if for Ghost to not be resisted by Steel if Pursuit at least comes back, so they can be punished. I'm not saying that Ghosts and Darks are ruining the metagame, because that would be absurd, obviously. But the problem is that... I don't know, I think they just went a little too far with it, and Game Freak could have balanced it out a little better. That's the basic gist of this whole video. I think it was basically a shower thought I had. Yeah, I don't think Weavile is like an issue in Gen 6, but it can definitely put a real strain on the team builder that's very specific to patch up when you've only got Dark, Fighting, and Fairy. Which, sounds like a lot, but not every Fairy type is going to answer a Dark type, for example. Like Bisharp, golden example. It's not going to be answered by Clef, ever. And I also don't know how much of a problem Chien Pao and King Gambit would be. I mean, King Gambit is a crazy Pokemon in general, and so is Chien Pao. But if Steel... because Chien Pao has both stabs resisted by Steel... King Gambit and Bisharp, for that matter, would go back to both stabs being resisted by Steel. And they're a lot less spammable and a lot less easy to pull off. So I'd really wonder if even Spectrier might be okay with the inability to rip through every Heatran, Pharaoh, Excadrill, whatever steel, just with its main stab move. Because I know it's an extreme example, but it is its main stab move, more or less. And yeah, you Will-O-Wisp and Hex, and it's irritating, whatever. But yeah, now Calyrex Shadow, that one I don't know about. That one's a lot worse. But yeah. So that is basically it from me. So for those who are watching the replay, we will finish this one off, just so I don't leave you hanging. So yeah, I think I picked the first one was more blatant, but in this game it's also, for those who are not watching, in this game we've got a Weavile against a team with, and there goes Heatran to a knockoff. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of overlapping factors. It's not just dark types and ghost types, but also things like the buff knockoff and the removal of pursuit as well. So Gen 6, major paradigm shift. Even if the metagame started molding itself into familiar shapes after a while with Clefable and Gliscor and Alakazam, Ferrothorn, Rotom Wash, Heatran. I mean, these are not, well, Clef, I guess, because it was a fairy type, so it was new. But, the same kind of balance structures with bulky Pokemon. Those are still generally familiar, but the way we play around things just changes so enormously. So I know it's not just attributable to the nasty Icicle Crash miss, and it so that one has nothing to do with the Steel Nerf, because it wants to Icicle Crash to beat its way through Clefable. But yeah, that's the basic idea. So I have a habit of repeating myself that I'm trying to get out of, so I will just end it there. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. They're good for the algorithm. And I will see you in the next one.